Welcome to Santa Barbara Talks with Josh Molina, or maybe today we should call it Goleta Talks, because I'm here with Goleta City Councilman James Kyriaco. James, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Am I in the right place? I thought this was Goleta Talks. Am I on the wrong podcast?
You're part of the future, brand expansion, James. So I'll use this podcast for marketing purposes when I approach new territories. James, I'm really excited to have you on because you're actually a person of many talents and many hats, and I've known you for 20 years, probably going back a long time to your political consultant days. And I want to talk to you a little bit today about the Santa Barbara City Council election and maybe get you to sort of be a pundit for a few minutes about what's going on there. I know that you're very in touch and tuned, involved. You know a lot of the players there. And I think your perspective is valuable and sort of how things are going to shape up. And then, of course, I'd like to dive into the state of Goleta. You're a Goleta City Council member, and Goleta, of course, is still a relatively new city, and it's really cool to sort of watch Goleta continue to grow and develop, and see it grow into its current state, which is quite an amazing little community, if I may say so myself. So
Goleta turns 20 years old next February.
Wow, it's so amazing. I remember I have a story on the front page of the news press, back then, I think, a lot of stories about Goleta. And old Morgan Green, you remember Morgan Green? She used to cover Goleta really well for the news press. And
I remember that news press edition very well. They have a copy of it on the wall at City Hall.
Yeah.
And, it's interesting because the day that Goleta became a city was, at least from an electoral standpoint, not a incorporation standpoint, was also the day that the first campaign I ever officially managed was successful. Roger Horton was elected that night along with Iya Falcone and Babatunde Folayemi and Dan Secord to the city council, and Marty Bloom became mayor in Santa Barbara. But at the same time, there was this election out in Goleta where I did not yet live. And that was the night that Goleta became a city. So there's some continuity and some kind of parallel narrative there.
Yeah, and I think my story on the front page that day is the one of the Santa Barbara election, I think. You didn't work with Babatunde that election, did you? Or you just,
no, Tim Allison managed that campaign.
Tim Allison, I remember Tim, yeah. Yeah, it's so funny, and this is a good transition to Santa Barbara. Why don't we just start there, and then we'll go into Goleta and your real job expertise. But it's a good transition because I remember Babatunde, and he was the first African American on the Santa Barbara City Council, and he kind of got lucky to some degree because Marty got elected mayor, and so it opened up this other position, and then he went in there. And I just remember that Babatunde was the kind of guy who, he walked down the street, and this is not exaggeration, and he'd see people and they hug him, and he would shake their hands, and he could have conversations pretty much in the west side, the east side, certainly downtown, with everybody, and they all kind of knew who he was. Like, that's Babatunde, or that's Baba, they would call him. And I remember thinking, wow, he's running for council. No way, he's the activist, he's not going to, he's actually going to go beyond the government side. And, I don't think he ran the greatest campaign, but he was so popular, that he was able to win and get elected. And he sort of, I don't remember how much money he raised and all that, but it's just sort of interesting. We're talking about potentially history again, in this Santa Barbara City Council election in a couple of ways. And just like back then, Babatunde was, he was the talk of the town. Like, wow, is he going to do that? And of course, he's no longer with us, but, I would love to, he'd be a guest on my podcast frequently if he were still here. Do you remember Babatunde? You have any thoughts on him?
He would be a really useful voice right now. He was someone who, really came from the community and really always kept the community front in mind in all of his decisions. And, he was someone that had a really strong sense of what the community wanted, and he would be their advocate. And so I remember he used to sometimes be criticized for not embracing other perspectives, because up to that point, the perspective that was mostly heard in Santa Barbara was the perspective of the business community, the perspective in particular of the downtown business community. And so when he was technically appointed to the city council as the top vote getter of the remaining candidates, because Marty Bloom promoted from city council member to mayor, and promoted for the final 2 years of her term, that was really a political earthquake in this town. And the composition of that new council, Babatunde, Iya Falcone, Roger Horton, they brought a different perspective to the city council. They were candidates that were, they were not necessarily completely aligned with the local Democratic Party at that time, but they really embraced democratic values, and they were people who could really balance that the perspective of business with the perspective of working families. And so you started to see different kinds of conversations about housing, about renters at that time, and there weren't always the kind of victories that we've had more recently on those issues, but a lot of conversations started with Babatunde and some of the others that were elected in 2001, back when I was kind of a hired gun.
Oh yeah, and that ushered in the Josh Iya Falcone years, which was about 8 years of shall we say fun, entertainment, and well, there's a lot of ways we can describe it, but I remember, actually, and I look back now, those were the good old days. Like, quite honestly, like, that was a strong council. Like, that council was really good, and they of course had their issues, and Marty and Iya famously had their issues, but they came to Tuesday prepared and ready to work on behalf of the city. And of course, they're politicians, they had their own interests, but it was I never left a meeting thinking, wow, one person participated at this meeting today. Like, it happens today. You're like, one person talked. I can't believe no one else talked. So, it's
they definitely had different leadership styles, and depending upon your perspective, I mean, leadership is such a subjective thing anyway, right? Mm-hmm. But they both had very different leadership styles.
Yeah. So here we are. Maybe we're going to see another ushering in of this new era. We don't know. We've got Mayor Cathy Murillo, who is facing a significant challenge from, I guess, multiple fronts. We've got Randy Rouse, a longtime incumbent council member, who has decided to run for mayor, and he's got a ton of money, more than 250 grand. I haven't looked last few days, but it's a lot of money. And he's out there, and he seems to have a lot of support from a faction or a portion of the community. And then you've got Cathy, of course, who's trying to get reelected. She's certainly objectively lost support from where she was 4 years ago in terms of some endorsements. We don't really know, like, people on the ground till election day. And then you've got James Joyce, who's trying to sort of upset everything here, and he's got some key endorsements, and he would be the first African-American mayor on the city council, if he got elected. He doesn't have as much money, but there certainly seems to be a little bit of interest in him and in his campaign. And you got Deborah Schwartz, who at one time was like a real formidable contender, but Randy Rouse sort of jumped in and really impacted some of her base and her fundraising and her ability to say, I'm running as the outsider here. And so, we got like 4 sort of scenarios here. What's your sort of like take on where we're at right now as a member of the Democratic Party, as somebody who's been allied with Cathy and their supporters, her supporters in the past? Are you worried here? You're nervous? What's going on, James?
Well, I'm proud that in Goleta we've done a lot of wonderful things. But
we'll get there, James.
Unfortunately, I guess we're not going to talk about that right away. No, let's see. So it's going to certainly be the most interesting Santa Barbara mayor's race that I've seen in probably 20 years. Just to kind of throw it back to 01. It's really I don't want to say it's anybody's guess or anybody's ball game, But I think that while I would still personally say Cathy is the favorite, I think that there are multiple candidates that are well financed, have strong support, and it's going to come down ultimately to usually campaigns are about raising money and walking precincts, and I think this one's going to come down to walking precincts, because I don't think money, at least in this race, is going to be the determining factor. I think that the major candidates, the higher profile candidates for mayor, are not going to lose, with maybe one exception, are not going to lose because they didn't have enough money. But I think that it's going to really come down to conversations at the door, conversations on the phone. This is going to be decided in the field. And so I think that is where Cathy, though arguably she has lost some support, she arguably still has the opportunity to avail herself of a stronger field operation than anybody else. And as someone that has been kind of doing the parry and thrust of campaigning for a long time, field wins elections. And I think Cathy has an advantage in the field.
Okay. Now, journalists like to think they know it all, right? They're pundits themselves. Jerry and I
sometimes wrong, but never in doubt, much like doctors.
Right. Nick Welsh and I, Jerry, we talk about this in various scenarios. Does James Joyce, can he win? One, can he cost Cathy to lose? Are we underestimating him? Are we overestimating him? You just talked about field work. The subtext there is Cathy's got a lot, James has much less. Can you talk about his candidacy and how it plays into this overall dynamic here?
Well, it's a little tricky for me living in Goleta for going on 11 years now to, have a really strong sense of his day-to-day operation. I have, next year I'll have 3 jobs because I have to run for re-election next year. So it's hard for me to sit here and objectively say, I know what James Joyce's field operation is. I have a strong understanding of the party's field operation because, I walked yesterday with the party slate. Okay. So, I have a sense for how many people are out. I have a sense for how many people are phone banking. I don't have that same sense for James. I watched the show called Santa Barbara Talks last week with Darcel Elliott as your guest. And, what I heard from her was that she knows James is out walking and has bumped into him in the field. So I'll take Darcel's word for it that he's got a field operation. I don't know that he has the kind of field operation that the party has, but he's no stranger to local politics or Democratic politics. I know that he used to work for Doss, used to work for Senator Jackson. He is not someone I would want to underestimate as a campaigner. He's been around. He knows the game. He's been a part of it. But I just have a sense that the party has a really strong and experienced field operation, and I still think that Cathy has an edge for that reason over not just James, over anyone else.
Yeah. So let's now talk about Randy, of course. So James and Cathy kind of pull from the same sort of base. I mean, James is very much, he, as Darcel said, they came from the same school of canvassing and organizing and campaigning. So, it's as Daraka Lermahar would say, it's unfortunate that we've got these two competing against each other because they're very similar on the issues. And of course, they're different in terms of their leadership styles. But over here, you got Randy Rouse, who most believe, if you're a Democratic Party person, is the real threat in terms of he's more moderate, some would say more conservative. He's been around a long time, and he's certainly not going to ever be a part of the Santa Barbara County Democratic Party. What's your take on him? I mean, he's got incredible name recognition, and he's raised a ton of money. I mean, are we going to see our first sort of Mayo mayor, 30 years or however long it's been? I mean, how concerned are you about that? And I'm sure Randy, you've crossed paths with him over the years.
I would say I know him. I don't know him well. I've been going to Paradise Cafe for a long time, back when that was how I knew of him. The only time Paradise Cafe ever seemed to be, Randy ever seemed to be involved in local politics was, I remember in 2010, when Meg Whitman was running for governor against Jerry Brown, that there was an event at Paradise for Meg Whitman when she was running. That was really kind of like the first time I ever experienced Randy in a political way. And then he's been on the council however long he's been on the council. And, I have more of a Goleta impression of him, which is, balanced and nuanced, and we don't need to get into that too much today. If Randy becomes mayor, I'm going to need to be able to work with him. And so I don't want to say too much. I'll say he's a formidable candidate. He's well financed. I've definitely talked to people who know him and like him and are supporting him. And do I think that having James in the race is not ideal from the perspective of a Cathy supporter? Yeah, it's not ideal. I think that elections are becoming increasingly polarized. I think local elections are becoming more partisan. I don't think that's something exclusive to Santa Barbara. I think that's happening everywhere. I think if you were to look at the literature and look at the media coverage, local races, governor's races, congressional races, but also city council races and mayor's races are becoming increasingly partisan. I think that's just kind of the nature of our politics in a world where increasingly through social media, we wear our identities on our sleeve, our virtual sleeve. So I think that voters are becoming more partisan. And so I think that even as some candidates will appeal to the idea of being nonpartisan, I think that appeals to some voters, but I think increasingly more and more voters than even 4 years ago when Cathy ran for mayor the first time. I think there are more voters than ever that will take the word of the political party they identify with at face value. And so what I find interesting is there's not a there's not a clear Republican, but there's a clear, more conservative choice. And so how many Republican voters are going to vote for Randy? And will they be able to be picked off by Deborah or picked off even by James? Be interested to see. And, how many how many nonpartisan but Republican registered voters are there that would care enough about climate change or some of the other issues that Cathy's been strong on that they would vote for her or just vote for her because she's the incumbent? Mm-hmm. It's going to be very interesting. I haven't seen a poll on this election that has enough detail that I could believe it and believe it's real, and certainly not recently. I remember 4 years ago, a poll came out that really kind of helped galvanize some of the local elected officials behind Cathy when there was the fear of Frank Hotchkiss being mayor. And that ended up working out well for Cathy. I don't know if there'll be any polling before this election that could have a similar effect. What I feel comfortable saying right now is that regardless of whether or not you think Randy is a moderate or whether people think Randy is a conservative, you have an incumbent on the ballot. You have an incumbent who has gotten things done. And I think most voters care about results and they care about things getting done. And so I think it would be a kind of a fascinating conversation to have about, do voters like the things that have been getting done, whether it's progress on climate change, whether it's progress on the rights of workers and progress on having more construction projects done by union workers rather than fewer. More tenant protections, a just cause eviction ordinance. What are the things that are results oriented that voters are going to care about? Because I think if you're a results oriented voter in the city of Santa Barbara, you're either going to really like this council or you're going to really not like that council, right? And so it kind of depends on what you care about.
Yeah, well put. All right, let's. I'm not going to add anything to that. That was really interesting. But let's talk about city council and what intrigues you about those races. We have Meagan Harmon, who was appointed, never been on a ballot before. Perception is she's an incumbent, so she's got an advantage. But we don't really know. Don't really know how many people are going to vote for her. They got Nina Johnson against. She's this longtime city employee, and she's got a lot of support and name recognition. Do you have any thoughts there on that contest? I mean, how do you analyze that from a political consultant perspective, pundit, someone's never been on the ballot, but she's been in office? What are the factors when thinking about who's going to come out ahead here?
Well, it's you bring up Meagan. So, Meagan is a really interesting case, right? So she came on the council, and just speaking for myself, I kind of took a bit of a wait and see approach with her. I didn't know her very well. Others did. I didn't know her as well, and I actually supported someone else for the appointment from an endorsement standpoint. And so I waited and I watched. And eventually what I saw was someone who turned out to be a strong voice, in my opinion, a strong voice for working families. She supported what I would consider to be a fairly reasonable project labor or agreement ordinance. There's a lot of communities on the South Coast throughout the state of California that have project labor agreements that are have a much lower threshold, like the Port of Hueneme. I think it's like $250,000 and up. The projects have to be union. Other places it has a higher threshold, but not a lot higher. And the fact that they did one that was at $5 million to me, and only for trades projects, not like every time road work happens, but when it's the more sophisticated projects that tend to bring in subcontractors who oftentimes are coming from out of the area because we just don't have either the insurance, the big enough to have the insurance, or enough of the expertise, so they have to go out of the area for the subcontractors. To be able to stand up and advocate for an ordinance that will ensure that work over time starts being done increasingly by local workers. I thought that was a really important step and a brave step, because I knew she was going to take heat for it, and she did it, and she turned out to be very strong on that issue. When the food and commercial workers had a labor action, she stood with them. And then later, after the pandemic, when they were on the front lines, because not all of us can afford to do Grubhub and Instacart to get our groceries and our food, there's a lot of folks that work in grocery stores that, during the pandemic, when we honestly didn't really yet know all the science about how the virus was transmitted, and having to wipe down surfaces all the time, and they had to go to work. And many times they were risking their lives, and she stood up for them and said that when the time came, she stood up and said, let's give them a little bit of money to recognize the work that they did during the pandemic, when these are people that are not high wage people, and a few $100s means a lot to them, and it's the difference between being able to put food on the table for themselves or not. And so I thought that was brave. And so, kind of waited and watched. And I've been pleasantly surprised with Meagan. And after kind of watching for a while, when I wanted to work regionally on childcare, she was the person I ended up partnering with. And so far, it's been a really positive partnership. And I think, we talked about 2001 earlier, and Roger Horton. Roger Horton was the first local elected official at a city that I ever remember talking about childcare and daycare and early childhood education in terms of what a city could and should do. And here we are 20 years later, and there's still a lot of opportunities for improvement in terms of how cities approach these issues. And the fact that she's been not only willing but excited to partner with another jurisdiction to get some things done on that has been a really positive thing. So I have a lot of respect for Meagan. The fact that she was able to get an appointment from the governor to the California Coastal Commission, that's a really big deal. That's a really big deal for Goleta. Goleta Beach, the fact that the city of Goleta currently doesn't have a local coastal plan that's been approved by the state. That's going to go through the planning commission, the coastal commission. And so having having someone who's from close by, who I can have a conversation with about Goleta Beach, who I can have a conversation with about our local coastal plan, is incredibly important. And if she were to not get reelected, the odds are, the way Coastal Commission appointments go, that appointment, if she were to lose reelection, the Coastal Commission appointment would probably go to someone from out of the area. And so we would lose some influence on how local coastal issues are managed.
Yeah, I think that, she's been, I've called her jokingly the new Doss Williams, only because, when Doss arrived, it was like, who is this person and why do they want to do everything so quickly? And he got quoted a lot, it was like got a big media, he got a lot of attention from the media, and she gets the same thing, a lot of attention from
both results-oriented people.
Yeah,
and have a propensity to get results.
Yeah, and so it is sort of this surprise, because at least I didn't know who she was before she interviewed that day. I'm like, everybody thought it was, the candidate you supported. Everyone thought she was going to get it. And all of a sudden it's like, whoa, the whole thing is shifting here. So what you're saying is you think she's going to get reelected. Is that fair, James?
I've been walking neighborhoods and I like her chances.
Okay, all right. And so then we have this other really intriguing scenario where you got Barrett Reed, who is well-funded, and he's very likable. He's a nice guy. He doesn't come across as some big mean developer who wants to build Santa Barbara, a bunch of towers everywhere. He doesn't come across like that. He comes across as a nice guy, family guy, local guy who grew up here. He pushes adaptive reuse. He says he hasn't added a single square foot of building, to this town, but he is supported by the development community very heavily. And he's taken on incumbent Kristen Sneddon, who in her own story is this amazing story because she kind of did not come up through the party. She came up as this community member, Star King, Peabody, this mom, she grew up here, very, teacher, just kind of this Santa Barbara person. And then she wins, and now she is embraced by the party. But do you have any thoughts on that? Any reason to be concerned if you're a Democratic Party person here that money is going to win the seat?
Oh, I have a lot of thoughts on that race. I think the question is going to be which ones do I voice and which ones do I keep to myself? I'll say it like this: as someone who worked in Santa Barbara politics for a long time and helped elect Democrats that had different types of views, people like Roger Horton, people like Brian Barnwell, people that were seen as progressive but also sensible. They were people that I think were very much kind of the essence of kind of suburban, more moderate Santa Barbara, right? These were people that wanted housing, but they didn't want to harm the unique character of Santa Barbara by overdeveloping or putting, as Dan Secord used to always say it, the wrong things in the wrong places. And I think that what I find so fascinating about this race is, in Goleta, we talk a lot about development now in terms of not wanting too much development and having, balanced approach to growth. And in Santa Barbara, that's how campaigns used to be for a long time. It was about trying to find people that would bring that sense of balance. And I think that Kristen really kind of embodies that sense of balance. She hasn't been anti-housing. She's been for housing that she thinks makes sense. She's been for housing that fits with the character of Santa Barbara. She's been a strong advocate for more affordable housing. And when she's been put to the test, she's supported affordable housing. Sometimes people say they're for affordable housing until, they have a chance to vote for it and then they find a reason not to. And that hasn't been my experience with Kristen. I can't say I've agreed with, every vote that I'm aware of when it comes to her on housing. But I think it's, you have to know she has a really clear worldview when it comes to housing and growth. And what's so interesting is you used to have these campaigns that were about what's the right amount of growth. And oftentimes developers were kind of vilified. And we still see that in some campaigns. And now here you have a race where it's an actual developer running. And I don't know if I've ever actually seen a developer run for local office before. I've seen people who got a lot of support from developers and development interests, but I've never actually seen a developer themselves run. So, I think in some ways this is going to be a really interesting test of whether or not a developer can get elected in local politics. And if Barrett Reed wins, what will that mean for the future of development in this community? Will we see a lot more growth in development, or will we see more of a balanced approach? I think a lot's on the line in that particular race. I think Kristen Sneddon, if you were to, I'm putting on kind of my political consultant hat here, but if I were to try and kind of dream up a candidate for that district, from what I know of that district, that candidate would look a lot like Kristen. Progressive, sensible, cares about affordable housing, doesn't want to completely max out lot line to lot line every project, doesn't want to go too tall, wants things kind of right-sized for the community. I mean, that to me is kind of like a throwback to how Santa Barbara campaign candidates kind of used to be. Yeah. And so I don't know a lot about Barrett's record on the Planning Commission. I don't have the time to watch Planning Commission meetings in Santa Barbara these days. I used to, but it'll be very interesting to see whether an actual developer can win a city council race in Santa Barbara and in a district that I interpret to be not in favor of rampant runaway growth.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting to see, what's going to happen. We're going to find out really soon. Let's transition now to the main event, so to speak, the good land, okay, where everything is happening right in front of our eyes, where I hit congestion every morning at Stork and Hollister, thanks to your predecessors. No, are we done with development in Goleta, James? No. Okay, let's make it about you, not me. Okay.
No, we can talk about growth.
Okay, all right. So I want to ask you about Goleta. What's going on here that people should know about right now at this stage? You say Goleta is going to celebrate 20 years coming up, and people think Santa Barbara is sort of like off on its own, but Goleta's adopted a PLA. Right, Goleta recently passed a resolution in support of reproductive freedom, like Santa Barbara did. So, can we talk about what's going on in Goleta and the issues that you're concerned about?
Absolutely, and we also just actually did a ban on flavored tobacco, and that's going to really kind of rein in some of the vaping that's been happening out there, because too much tobacco is getting in the hands of kids these days. But yeah, a lot of good things are happening in Goleta. We are coming up on our 20-year anniversary. That'll be the beginning of February of next year. So that's a big deal, and I know that there are preparations underway to find the best way to celebrate that, and those plans are still in the works. And looking forward to seeing what we come up with. I think that there's a lot to be proud of if you live in Goleta. We've done a lot of good things. We've done a lot of good things recently. There is a lot happening right now that's visible. There are still housing projects being completed that were approved back in, I think, believe it or not, 2014. So there's a big project behind the, actually kind of next door to M Special Brewery, and kind of nestled in that kind of high tech area where Raytheon is, and some of the other kind of technology businesses. There's a housing project going in called Cortona Point that is, I think it's like about, I'm going to get the number wrong, around 150 apartments. And it's being built in two phases. One of the phases is at the point now of they're starting to sign people up for leases. And then the second phase is still being constructed. In terms of where people might notice this. So if you're driving on the freeway towards Santa Barbara and you get to Stork, you'll start to see it on the right-hand side of the freeway. You'll see the construction. So the development's very close to the freeway. It's set back from Hollister.
It's right on the railroad tracks.
It's very close to the railroad tracks. That's very true. That's just where the railroad tracks are. So it's very close to them. and it's coming along. That project was approved, I think, 6 or 7 years ago. I've been working with the developer to see if he can reserve some of the units for family daycare providers, so that the residents that live there that have young children, or the businesses that are across the street or in the surrounding neighborhood, can leave their children there, while they're at work, so that that'll save a couple car trips, and it'll also help increase the access to affordable childcare in our community. And John Price has been very receptive to that, and we're still kind of working through some of the details there. So that's happening. So that project will come in soon. That'll be a mix of 1, 2, and 3 bedroom apartments. And it's one of the last kind of major projects that were part of the Goleta general plan. So when that one's done, there will just be kind of, I think, one major potential project left after that, which is, it used to be called Willow Springs Phase 3. 2 parts of Willow Springs have been done. The final one that people call Heritage Ridge, that one is in the planning process and will be coming to the City of Goleta Planning Commission sometime in the future. And that's another major project. That one will probably be more than 300 units if it ever gets built. That's the last major project that could actually happen in Goleta without changing the general plan, without doing something to pave over agricultural lands, which people in Goleta do not want. They like the agricultural kind of small town feel of Goleta. So I think that if there's any real growth in Goleta after Cortona is done, and after something is finally resolved one way or another with Heritage Ridge, it's going to have to be kind of repurposing some existing space. You talk about Barrett Reed and adaptive reuse. It might have to be adaptive reuse of some other land use in order for it to get significant housing after that. So it's going to be, as we move into our housing element update and the final steps for RHNA, the Regional Housing Needs Assessment process in Goleta, it's going to be really interesting to see. I think we'll be able to get through this RHNA process, but how Goleta can meet future state housing mandates, I don't know how it's going to happen. It's going to be a huge challenge for Goleta. And I think we're going to have a big conversation as a larger community about growth and housing and where housing can go, and what's that going to look like.
Yeah, can you rezone some of these commercial areas to have housing? I mean, if we know we don't want to develop in that swath of land to the toward the mountains off Highway 101, right? Like if that ever gets developed, I'm out of here. Like, forget, like, that we need that open space, right? Where can we put housing, and think creatively? I feel like there's a big industrial area, all up and down Hollister, all the way to Elwood. There seems like there's spots for housing that aren't on agricultural land. Is that some of the conversations? Or?
I think so. So a huge majority of Goleta, when I say huge, I mean like around 70% of the voters supported Measure G 2012, which said that it identified large agricultural parcels that still exist in Goleta, and said that if you want to rezone those for housing, you can't do it without there being a vote of the people. So if you wanted, I think you didn't say Bishop Ranch, but you were probably alluding to Bishop Ranch earlier.
I didn't want to put it in anyone's mind, but yes.
Well, looks like I just stepped in it for that. So, please, I'll be careful what I say here, but you can't do anything with Bishop Ranch without the voters weighing in. Yeah. And, I'm not always a fan of, zoning by ballot box, but I think that Goleta is a unique community, and that if you want Goleta to support more housing, Goleta needs to be a part of that community, of that conversation. The whole city needs to be. And so I think for Goleta that makes sense. And so I'm glad that we have Measure G 2012, because it's going to ensure that if anything ever did happen with any significant agricultural parcel, that needs to be a transparent process, that needs to be a collaborative process, that needs to be a community process.
I don't want to go too far deep into this because it's not your expertise, but I wish there could be some coordinated effort between Isla Vista and the county and the city of Goleta to talk about how, and UCSB to talk about how the impacts of Isla Vista and students and growth and housing there impact into Goleta, because it's this artificial line, it's like, oh, Goleta County, and El Colegio, and it's like all of a sudden. But if you've ever been, James, like to you go to Target, like it is, especially during the school year, it is a sea of people, and they're walking, they're on bicycles, they're on cars, and they're not from like Goleta, so it's dangerous. You're like crossing the street, and it's like, oh my goodness. And I wish there could be more coordination between how we grow between Isla Vista and the county, which is not the Goleta, and the city of Goleta, because it is quite, just spend some time there on Stork in front of Target and Camino Real Shopping Center, and it is incredible the amount of busyness and activity that goes on. I want to talk to you. Sorry, do you want to comment on that? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I'll be very careful and cautious in how I comment on that, because I'll just say we're in dialogue. I'll say it like that. We're in dialogue with the university and the county when it comes to the impacts associated with the students, because we have a situation right now where there's a lot of students living in hotel rooms. They're living in unincorporated area hotel rooms, and they're living in Goleta incorporated hotel rooms. And that has a significant impact on the city of Goleta in terms of our revenues, because after 30 days, you cannot collect transient occupancy tax on an occupant of a hotel room. So that creates impacts on the city. And I'll just stop right there, just saying that's something that would be true anywhere else in the state of California, and it happens to also be true in the city of Goleta.
Yeah. Well, there's a housing.
I'll just stop right there.
There's a housing impact, rental impact too, because what happens, and I see it in my neighborhood, is students come in, they can pay, depending on where they're from, lots of above market rents for housing, because there's nowhere else. So if you have wealthy family, or you have access, you can go rent a house that could be rented to a family in Goleta for the market rate, but instead these students can pay above market rate, and it really impacts the type of community that you have. So it's
very true. I think that regional conversations between Isla Vista, the county, Goleta, and even Santa Barbara, because Santa Barbara has the airport right there. So I think we all need to be talking, and we need to figure out a way to resolve some of these issues. One of the reasons why I pay a lot of attention to what happens in Santa Barbara is because, for Goleta to be successful, we really need Santa Barbara to be successful. And the better they can meet their housing challenges, the better off we are. So it's important that we work well together and that we work regionally.
Hey, let me ask you a question a little bit deeper. You mentioned childcare a lot, right? It's a concern for you. It's a passion for you. It's a political issue for you, but it's also a personal one. You've talked about Roger 20 years ago, and you two working on that. Can you talk a little bit about why this issue is so important to you? So many candidates, they say the same thing, right? They talk about the homeless, they talk about the housing, right? They talk about development, and these are important issues. You talk about the importance of childcare for working families all the time, and it's not, Meagan Harmon talks about it. You've been talking about it first and for a lot longer. Why is this so important to you? Can you talk about that?
Sure. So, and I'll talk about it from a couple of different perspectives. So, when cities came about, cities had to deal with different kinds of challenges, right? So it's like, well, where can we put parks? Where can we put open space? Where can we put housing? Where should a hospital go? You know, a lot of planning considerations happened when cities were first happening. And most of the time, childcare, daycare, early childhood education in general was not a consideration. And the reason why is because what our workforce looked like in the city of those days was a very different workforce. It was a male-dominated workforce. And so, you know, people that were caregivers were primarily women, and most children got their early childhood education from that one parent at home. So what's happened since the 60s and the 70s is the nature of our workforce has changed. We've gone from being single earner driven workers being able to bring home the bacon, so to speak, and the other, usually the woman, being able to stay home with the child, and if there's an economic calamity, they can go and work for a while, to now a workforce where both parents, regardless of their gender, regardless of their gender identity, have to work. You know, we've gotten to a point as a society where not working isn't really an option for you. Unless you have a certain economic situation, you have to work. And so it's created this new dynamic that's been, I use the phrase hiding in plain sight. Well, this is an issue that's been hiding in plain sight for years. And I think that cities are just now starting to come to the realization that how we plan for childcare or not impacts our ability as a city to be able to function well or not. And I wrote an op-ed about this I was getting ready to write the op-ed right when COVID hit. And I ended up changing the op-ed to talk about the impacts of COVID. This was in March of 2020, about the need for childcare infrastructure. And right now we're having a national conversation about what we call human infrastructure, right? So you have the infrastructure bill at the federal level that has already passed the Senate, and the House has been waiting to deal with it because they want to also deal with the human infrastructure bill, which is the Build Back Better plan, right? And the Build Back Better plan has the human infrastructure piece, including childcare. And so I think childcare is really having a moment right now. I think it's largely due to the fact that Elizabeth Warren ran for president and had a really strong childcare program. And I think President Biden kind of took note of that and has adapted and shifted to accommodate, because I think he now has a better sense of the problem. So I think it's important for cities to actually have zoning that is not exclusionary zoning for childcare, where if you want to have childcare in your home, in your business, that you don't have to go through a bunch of hoops. The state already has a lot of requirements to make sure that it's done safely. So cities shouldn't do too much to make it harder. And so one thing we've done in Goleta is when we did our zoning ordinance update, our staff was already going to have some childcare improvements because that's where things were going. I was able to work with our staff to kind of soup it up a little bit more and make it a little bit more progressive, to create some different incentives. And we're starting to see that now. So there's a project out at the Kyriaco marketplace that's going to happen. That's going to be medical office buildings. Well, if we hadn't done our zoning changes, it would only be medical office buildings. The way that project is proceeding now, because we did our zoning changes, they're going to incorporate some childcare on site. And that's going to make the impacts of growth associated with taking a vacant parcel and turning it into offices. It's going to mitigate some of the impacts of that growth, because at least you won't have 2 trips a day for some of those parents having to go drop off their kid before they go to work and pick up their kid after they go to work. They can have their child right there. And if they want to go check on how the child's doing on their lunch hour, they can walk over and spend some time with their child. And I think that will be really a really positive thing. I think that childcare is also being increasingly seen as an economic development issue as well. And I would say that even the National Chamber of Commerce recognizes that. And so I think the business community recognizing the importance of childcare makes it easier for those of us who care about the social and kind of human interest aspects of that, makes it easier for us to work together. Because I think there's sort of a new community consensus building around the importance of affordable, accessible, quality childcare. The County of Santa Barbara just voted to set aside $2 million of the rescue plan money towards stabilizing the childcare sector, towards ensuring that we stop the bleeding, because childcare spaces have gone down post-COVID. So what I would say is if you want people to be able to work, you have to have the infrastructure for them to be able to work. If you want to have a workforce that can't have any children, then we can kind of keep going down the current path of not having a place to put your children and ensure that they're getting a good education, that they're being exposed to good nutrition, having opportunities for healthy, safe play, and to be able to grow their minds that way and to be able to develop. One of the great things about being a city council member is you get to be a member of things like the National League of Cities. In 2019, I went to San Antonio for the National League of Cities conference. The city of San Antonio did a major early childhood education initiative called Pre-K for SA. And this was something that was initiated by Mayor Julian Castro, who recently ran for president and was also recently in Santa Barbara through the UCSB Arts and Lectures program. And what he did was he convened a task force of business leaders and community leaders. And he asked them a question. And that question was, if you could solve one problem to help this community, what would you solve? And the business folks and the community folks came together. They met for, I think, 6 months. And they came back and said, early childhood education. And so they did a sales tax initiative, I think a 1/8 of a cent sales tax for 8 years to create an early childhood education program. And I got an opportunity to tour one of the centers. I got an opportunity to see some of the outputs that came from that initiative, like an adaptive reuse of a shopping mall that was turned into a community library and a community meeting space through a public-private partnership. And so now you have a situation in San Antonio where they actually just voted to renew the sales tax overwhelmingly because the program's working. The cost of childcare is going down. The accessibility of childcare is going up. The things that should be going down are going down. The things that should be going up are going up. And so it's been a really positive thing for San Antonio. And there's other communities that are making positive impacts as well. I'm glad that Goleta's been able to lead the way. I couldn't have done it without our staff. I couldn't have done it without the leadership of Mayor Paula Prodi and the rest of the city council. We've had unanimous support for these initiatives.
You know, James, I wanted to ask you a little bit about your personal story, because I know we've talked about it in the past, but you've shared a little bit about what it was like for you growing up. And I think you were raised by a single mom and some of the childcare challenges your family faced. Can you talk a little bit about your own personal experience? Because I'm sure it sort of, motivates you to some degree, as an adult to be pursuing these issues.
Absolutely. So, I was someone that grew up in kind of that first generation of children growing up where everybody has to work, basically, right? And so, my mom worked. My mom worked as a medical receptionist, first at Pueblo Radiology, and then later at the Cancer Center of Santa Barbara, the Cancer Foundation of Santa Barbara. And so, when I was growing up, my mom and dad had divorced. My dad went into the service, went into the U.S. Army, and was stationed abroad in Germany for some time. And so, I was fortunate from the standpoint of I had grandparents who could step in sometimes, but not always. And so growing up, I needed childcare, I needed daycare. And then as I got older, I needed after school care. And so that's really why it's something that resonated for me as a public policy matter as I got older. And as I started to recognize that, there are people who can affect change if they're given an opportunity, if they're in the right position, and have the opportunity to weigh in on public policy. So it's been really rewarding to be able to work on an issue that was challenging for me personally growing up, because I was someone who had a lot of privilege. My family, my grandparents were fairly well off on both my mother's side and my father's side. So I was exposed to certain things, and I had certain privileges. But I was also living with a single mother who was working on a receptionist salary, and sometimes worked at night as a bartender when she needed extra money. So money was often tight for us. And so, I got to experience some of the struggles that she had to experience. And so I can only imagine how much more difficult it would be for other folks who don't have some of the same kind of privileges, who didn't have a grandparent who could step in sometimes, who didn't have a trusted family friend that could step in sometimes. It's really an issue that affects all of us, whether we have children or not, because we all rely on workers. And so our workers need to have a place to put their children, but also, if we want our community to be successful, ultimately, we need people to be well-adjusted. We need people to have the best possible chance every day to have a good education. And from everything we know, from a scientific perspective, those first 3 years are so critical. The first 5 years are important, but the first 3 years in particular are essential. And if more of our children every day don't have access to the best possible services, they're going to have a tougher time as they get older, as they go into the K through 6 system, as they go into the secondary school system, as they think about things like college or community college. It's just going to be tougher for people. And so if you have information and that something can matter to people and it can make a real tangible difference in their lives, I think you have an obligation to try and make things better. And so I'm working with others collaboratively to try and make things better. And I'm really encouraged that the county is stepping up, that the city of Goleta is stepping up, and now the city of Santa Barbara is also stepping up. I feel like there's, in political science, they call it a policy window. I feel like right now there's a policy window with the elected officials we have locally where we can get something positive done for our children and youth to make things better. And I'm just trying to push as hard as I can to help ensure that happens.